For years, the confrontation between Russia and NATO was defined by tanks, missiles, troop deployments, and the threat of direct military escalation. But today, the boundaries of that confrontation are becoming harder to identify. From drone incursions and GPS interference to cyber attacks, sabotage, undersea infrastructure, and the race to build competing satellite networks, the contest is increasingly taking place below the threshold of conventional war. NATO says that Russia is testing the alliance through hybrid operations, while Moscow argues that Western military expansion and support for Ukraine are themselves part of a broader confrontation with Russia. As incidents accumulate across Europe and the strategic competition reaches cyberspace and outer space, the central question emerges. Is this still deterrence and competition, or has Russia and NATO already entered a gray zone war? I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Welcome to Think Tank.
Our world is becoming unhinged.
The downing of a drone over Romanian airspace by a Spanish F-18 marks another troubling escalation on NATO's eastern flank. While interceptions of stray assets have occurred since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the active destruction of an airborne target inside sovereign NATO territory, the fourth such incident this year, demonstrates how the conflict is continually breaching international borders. When an uncrewed craft crosses from Moldova into Romania, it ceases to be a minor border incident and becomes a direct test of NATO's collective air defense capabilities and rules of engagement. Tactically using multi-million-dollar fighter jets like the F-18 to neutralize low-cost drones highlights the severe cost asymmetry NATO faces in gray zone warfare. Yet, the Russian salvos hitting Ukraine and Ukrainian drones reaching the Moscow region, passive monitoring is no longer an option. As incursions threaten border towns like Galati, NATO is being pushed towards a far more assertive air defense posture, one that risks unpredictable friction points with Moscow as the line between deterrence and direct confrontation continues to blur. As tensions between Russia and NATO move beyond Ukraine, drones, cyber attacks, sabotage, and satellite competition are creating a new battlefield, one where the line between peace and war is increasingly blurred.
The confrontation between Russia and NATO is increasingly unfolding in space, where war and peace are no longer clearly separated. Across Europe's eastern flank, drones are entering Allied airspace. GPS signals are being disrupted, critical infrastructure is facing growing security concerns, and cyber operations are testing the resilience of governments and societies. Recent incidents have sharpened these fears. A drone was intercepted over Latvia after entering NATO airspace, while Germany has been investigating a suspected explosives-equipped drone near Leipzig airport. Western governments have also warned about Russian-linked sabotage, cyber activity, and interference targeting European infrastructure. Moscow rejects such accusations, portraying NATO's military expansion and support for Ukraine as part of a wider confrontation with Russia. The competition is also moving into space. Russia is accelerating its Razve satellite constellation, seeking greater independence in communications and potentially reducing reliance on Western commercial systems such as Starlink. Together, these developments reveal a new strategic reality. The battlefield is no longer defined only by territory, airspace, cyberspace, undersea cables, critical infrastructure, and satellites are becoming arenas of confrontation. The danger is that repeated ambiguous incidents could eventually turn a gray zone conflict into a direct Russia-NATO crisis.
The Russia-NATO confrontation is moving beyond Ukraine, with drones, cyber attacks, sabotage, GPS interference, and satellite competition creating new fronts across Europe. NATO accuses Moscow of exploiting vulnerabilities below the threshold of war, while Russia rejects the allegations and blames NATO expansion. As incidents multiply, where does competition end and warfare begin? To discuss these questions, we are joined from Brussels by Mr. Nicholas Williams, former NATO official, and from Moscow by Mr. Sergei Markov, former advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Welcome, gentlemen, to Q News. I would start with you, Mr. Williams. Now, NATO increasingly describes Russia's activities as hybrid warfare. From your own experience inside the alliance, what exactly constitutes a gray zone attack, and where should we draw the line between confrontation and war?
Yes, good evening, Hala, and
good evening, sir.
Good evening to Sergei. Well, it's always difficult to define what is gray area, but it's a level of interference by Russia in NATO domestic affairs, designed to disrupt and to create suspicion and concern among the civilian population. For example, cyber attacks, sabotage, and so on. And Russia has engaged in these activities. It would be foolish of them not to engage because they feel that the West is at war with them. So there's no doubt that the Russians are engaging in this below the level of attack disruption. But the question is, how does NATO respond? And I think NATO is a bit in disarray about the response.
Mr. Markov, now Western governments increasingly accuse Moscow of conducting a campaign of sabotage, cyber attacks, and political interference across Europe. So how does the Kremlin view these accusations?
It's clear that Western countries, NATO is aggressor, and they accuse victim, which is Russia is. We don't regard this war as war between Russia and Ukraine. We regard this war as a war between war of NATO against Russia. And this is proxy war. And NATO in 2014 overthrown democratic elect president of Ukraine, imposed 100% undemocratic, absolutely repressive, in fact, terroristic regime to Ukrainian people, and then provoked the war between Russia and Ukraine. NATO, and first of all now Europe, because under the Trump, United States distanced itself, but Europe used Ukraine as proxy army, exactly as Iran used Hussites as proxy army and Hezbollah also as proxy army. And the problem is that Russia, step by step, going forward and crashing more and more Ukrainian army. And as a response, NATO made steps to the escalation. It's repeated. Russia going forward, and NATO made again steps of escalation. And the question is, how long Russia will continue to distance NATO from this war? At some time, NATO, European countries, in fact, will be in the situation of already war in Russia. most of the analysts regard that mostly possible is pirate attacks of European NATO countries against Russian ships. It's pirate attack, it's absolutely clear, action of war according to the all international law. But European countries are prepared to say, no, 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 this is not pirate attack. We just captured this ship. But it's exactly pirate attack, capturing these ships. So this is the mostly dangerous scenario on the Baltic Sea and in the northern part of Atlantic. It's capturing of Russian ships and strong Russian response.
Mr. Williams, now recent drone incidents, including, of course, the interception of a drone over Latvian airspace, have raised concerns across NATO's eastern flank. How seriously should the alliance interpret these incidents?
Well, it's difficult to know the motivation of these incursions by drones. I think the consensus is that the Russians are careless as opposed to being deliberate in these incursions. But even so, the carelessness of the Russian targeting has increased over the course of these years since the war began in 2022. So yes, NATO is concerned about the increasing examples of random incursions by Russian drones. I think if the Russians deliberately attacked NATO territory, deliberately attacked an infrastructure related to the supply and support of Ukraine, say in Poland or elsewhere, then I think that would be a major escalation and NATO would have to respond. But so far, it's believed that because, as you said in your introduction, say a Spanish F-16 shooting down a drone which costs just thousands or tens of thousands of dollars is not an efficient way of shooting down the drones. So NATO is urgently examining how to counter drones without having to use expensive aircraft and missiles and so on.
Mr. Markov, does Russia consider what NATO calls hybrid warfare simply another dimension of the broader confrontation created by Western support for Ukraine and NATO's military expansion?
First of all, let me discuss a little bit with Nicholas about drones. Look, figures, in fact, shows that something about 80% of those drones which have been shot down on the territories of the NATO countries, it's Ukrainian drones, but not Russians. Absolutely clear majority of them are Ukrainian drones. Why? It's because Ukraine attacked NATO countries? Of course not. It's because NATO secretly give to the Ukrainian army airspace of the countries which is members of NATO for attacking Russia. Specifically, it's Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania and Poland, through which Ukrainian drones go to the area of the Russian St. Petersburg region, where Russia has a lot of infrastructure for the exporting of the oil and gas. NATO countries say, look, we should stop Russia getting money from selling of oil and gas. That's why we should organize attack of drones against Russian oil infrastructure. That's why NATO countries are giving their airspace to Ukrainian army.
So you're
You know,
saying that these were deliberate attacks?
Yeah. They give this airspace for Ukrainian army because it's more easy for Ukrainian army to go by territory of the NATO country directly to the St. Petersburg region, not to be struck by Russian anti-rocket missile system. But this is action of war. You know, the problem is that Russia now is thinking how long we could be so moderate and shy and modest and to allow NATO countries, in fact, to take part in the war against Russia. And sometime probably Russian leaders will have to give real response to this clear aggression of the NATO country. Because, I should repeat, if Latvia and Estonia giving their airspace for Ukrainian attack against Russian territory, it's participation, direct participation in the war according to international law. The problem is that Russia is waiting, talking, try to say to European countries, look, you're crazy. Why you going directly to the war between Russia and NATO? Please stop. But NATO absolutely ignores this. And how long this could be continue? Escalation of great aggression against from NATO side and moderate shy modest position of Russia. Now we have very big pressure of Russian public opinion to the Russian leaders. Look, give real response to them. Give real strikes to them. Because if we continue to be so modest, they will be more and more aggressive.
Okay. So, Mr. Williams, you said that those violations were unintentional, but Mr. Markov says they were intentional. So, Mr. Williams, could repeated airspace violations, whether intentional or unintentional, and drone incursions be deliberate Russian probes designed to measure NATO's response times and political thresholds?
Yes, they could be. And of course, NATO or the Americans or individual countries don't have a direct knowledge of what the Russian intent is. And some analysts do suspect, and some countries, particularly Poland and the countries in the eastern flank and the Baltics, believe that the Russians are probing the Western defenses, NATO defenses, probing how far they can push NATO. And so, yes, there is a increase in the position or suspicion that the Russians are testing NATO. But officially, NATO is very hesitant to say, yes, the Russians are testing NATO. Yes, they were testing NATO deliberately and provocatively because, for a start, NATO is and NATO countries are uncertain. We don't know what the Russian intent was when they're firing these drones, but also they don't want to, contrary to what Sergei says, NATO doesn't want to escalate the war in a provocative way by retaliating on Russian territory or Russian forces for these drone incursions.
Very well. Mr. Markov, Russia's development of Razvet is being presented as an effort to create a Starlink-like satellite network. Is this primarily a commercial project, a military necessity, or both?
It could be theoretically in the future a commercial project, of course, because Starlink is a very good system which give very good capacities for the thousands, possibly millions of different agents on the land. And but now Razvet, of course, first of all, should serve to the Russian army because it should help Russian army to target rocket missiles and drones to the position of Ukrainian army and Ukrainian military-industrial complex. Starlink is a commercial project, of course, from the beginning, but partially for Ukraine, it's worked, of course, 90% as military infrastructure. As we understand, it's not Elon Musk presenting it. The Pentagon of the United States bought this such capacity of using Starlink capacities for the Ukrainian army under the Biden administration. But now then Donald Trump stopped to do it, and now European Union countries, first of all, Poland, is paying for military using of Starlink for Ukrainian army.
Mr. Williams, one of the most difficult questions is attribution. How can NATO respond effectively when sabotage or cyber attacks cannot immediately be conclusively attributed to a state, a particular state?
Well, I think you've answered your own question. NATO cannot, because it's an alliance of 32 countries which discusses these issues intensively and have internal disagreements. NATO cannot, in an attack which cannot be attributed and and has an uncertain attribution, NATO cannot respond decisively. But there is a tendency now in the alliance to suspect that the Russians are behind many of these unattributable attacks, and there is a growing voice to say we must respond, even though there's no unanimous agreement between 32 countries about how to respond. But they will respond, I believe, in terms of accusing the Russians more and more of being behind, say, cyber attacks or undersea cable attacks, or even such incidents as you mentioned in your introduction about the explosive drone found in or near Leipzig airport. So yes, the NATO countries will accuse the Russians more and more of these incidents.
Mr. Markov, now Ukraine has demonstrated how strategically important commercial satellite communications can be during war. Has the experience of the Ukraine conflict convinced Moscow that dependence on foreign satellite networks represents a national security vulnerability?
Of course, all this system they use for the military capacities, and in Russia, government quite criticized for not able to give this satellite for the using by Russian army. And interconnection between different military units is regarded as very important now, and by Russian public and the Russian authorities, it's regarded not as the best characteristic of Russian army. So Russia interesting to develop such a satellite system for proving. But also I should add about this, that Russia can provoke and check NATO, how NATO react. You know, this is, I'm sorry, this is direct lie of the NATO leaders. All NATO leaders know 100% that it's exactly NATO who is making escalation steps. All of them know 100% that Russia wants to avoid a direct clash between NATO, because very simple thing, because NATO very strong by conventional army, and to be successful in the war against NATO, Russia will have to use nuclear weaponry. and this led to the nuclear war and possibly killing of all of us in the fire of such a nuclear war. Of course, Russian society and Russian leaders doesn't want this to happen. That's why it's just lie and propaganda of NATO leaders who says, oh, look, Russia is checking and provoke us. It's absolutely another thing. It's a strategy of NATO country. It's Chinese decision of war, regardless as a thousand of small steps. So no cutting red line, big red line, but many small steps and doing escalation by such way. From my point of view, and it's a very dangerous strategy because sometime NATO will appear to be already in situation of war against Russia, and Russia will have to give stronger response. And this is mostly dangerous scenario. It's exactly the scenario about which we should talk every day. That a small step escalation of doing by NATO provoke Russia to give some time very strong response.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, now Germany's recent concerns over sabotage and an explosives-equipped drone near Leipzig airport suggest that civilian infrastructure may increasingly become part of the battlefield. So how vulnerable is Europe right now?
Well, I think it's very vulnerable, and European politicians realize it's very vulnerable. Because, as you know, after the Cold War, the Europeans didn't actually consider defense or collective defense as a very important issue. They're now trying to catch up, and they're now trying to increase their defense expenditures. But part of those increase in defense expenditures, part of it is military buildup, but also part of it is resilience and the building of resilience of civilian infrastructure against cyber attacks, against sabotage, and so on. So yes, the Europeans are vulnerable. Yes, they are conscious of vulnerability. And the EU, for example, has a aim to strengthen resilience and in the EU countries by 2030. So it's not a quick fix, but there is a consciousness among, I think, most European politicians and decision makers that we are vulnerable.
Mr. Markov, NATO argues that Russia is testing the alliance's resolve without wanting to trigger a full-scale war. So is Moscow deliberately operating below the threshold of Article 5?
I already mentioned, NATO leaders directly lie that Russia is testing NATO. They know that all NATO leaders know very well that aggressors they are, and but they want to defeat Russia, and they don't hide it away. They repeated it many times that they want to do it by conventional army and by proxy war by hands of Ukrainian army, and not to provoke Russia for using nuclear weaponry and to destroy Russian political regime and then to destroy Russia as a result. It's their strategy, which is absolutely clear. And accusing Russia by a lie that Russia is testing NATO, it's part of this strategy, and why we should discuss this direct lie. And what we should discuss that how long it could continue the step-by-step escalation of NATO countries against Russia and how long Russia will not give a real strong response by military ways. Because now a lot of people in Russia say, look, we will have to have strikes against European countries anyway. That's why it's better to do it sooner than later. And Sergei Karaganov, very good friend of mine, our colleague, he directly repeated, and he is a symbol of such ideology, I would say. Mm-hmm. We don't know is it happening or not, but I want to stress, if European leaders will continue to go by their way of escalation in the military more and more involvement in such a war against Russia, the direct war between Russia and Europe will be inevitable. Mm-hmm. Inevitable. Mm-hmm. It's tragedy, to my regret. It will touch all of you.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, now Russia has been accused of using cyber operations, GPS interference, and also electronic warfare against European targets. Are these isolated operations, or do they form part of a coherent Russian strategy?
First of all, just let me respond to Sergei Markov in terms of European leaders lying. They're not lying. They believe profoundly and intensely that the Russians are exercising their subversion, their infrastructure attacks, cyber attacks, even physical attacks, even murders, as in the Salisbury poisoning case a few years ago. They believe intensely that the Russians are operating to subvert and create confusion and suspicion among our populations, even election interference. Whether this is a deliberate testing or not, no one actually knows. But the Russian actions have created a pattern that intelligence agencies discern and analyze that, yes, the Russians are doing this for reasons that maybe Sergei has hinted at. Mm-hmm. The Russians believe that the West is waging a proxy war against Russia, and Russia has somehow to respond. The war in Ukraine is not a proxy war from a NATO perspective. It's a war that was provoked by Russia, and the NATO countries are trying to defend Ukraine and stop Ukraine from collapsing, as it were. So, yes, Europe believes that this is the Russians are operating in a hybrid way, whether it's significant or not, or what the reasons are, we don't know, but they do these actions.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Markov, very quickly, because we're running out of time, if Russia wanted to test NATO without launching a conventional attack, what would be the strategic logic behind targeting infrastructure, cyberspace, airspace, or communications rather than territory?
No reason, no logic. You know, European leaders at the same time says that, look, Russia is very weak. Russia not able even to crush Ukrainian army and to take Ukrainian territory. On one hand, they say, look, Russia is preparing to attack great NATO, which is 10 times more than Ukraine. Where's this logic? No logic. It's just propaganda and lie from European leaders. I want to repeat, Nicholas, I'm sorry. Look more carefully on what European leaders say. We all of us know that politicians are lying. But now European leaders not lying as normal politicians. They lying much more stronger and much more dangerous than normal politicians. It's the problem of Europe.
Yes. Well, I'd like to thank our guests for today, Mr. Nicholas Williams joining us from Brussels and Mr. Sergei Markov joining us from Moscow. Thank you, gentlemen, for this discussion and for your valuable insights. Well, this brings us to the end of this episode of Think Tank. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching.